MS Now's Nnamdi Egawonwu is on the ground for us in St. Paul, Minnesota. David Noriega has been digging into those ICE records. And MS Now national security analyst Chris O'Leary is a former FBI senior executive and senior vice president at the Soufan Group. Good to talk to all of you. Nnamdi, tell us about this field hearing today and how lawmakers are trying to amplify these stories.
Yeah, Chris, the roughly 28 or so lawmakers that attended this hearing say they're doing so to address both the conduct of these ICE agents, some of whom have been accused of violating the constitutional rights of Americans and acts like racial profiling, as well as to shine a spotlight on some of the specific witness accounts you've been hearing regarding that conduct. So you mentioned, we heard from a first-generation Egyptian refugee, or Ethiopian refugee rather, who discussed the fact that he disclosed he was a citizen but was still detained for hours by ICE agents. We heard from another ICE observer who brought up the fact that she was detained for just merely following ICE agents, and during that detention was pepper sprayed, was, in her words, demeaned and taunted, and ultimately forced in a facility for hours before she was ultimately released. A big part of this also, though, is to highlight the community implications of the surge of personnel here, which includes a chilling effect that has led to a decrease in business with employees, some fearful of going into work, and raids at at least near high schools, including one we saw last week in the hours after Renee Good's death at Roosevelt High School in Minneapolis. I want to play for you an accounting from an ACLU attorney about exactly how the surge of ICE personnel is impacting the community here.
More than 30% of students were absent from classes this week. Parts of our city are like a ghost town, as the very presence of federal agents make them terrified to go about their daily life, and many immigrant neighbors have not left their homes in days, avoiding basic activities like buying groceries, picking up prescriptions, or going to work.
And Chris, we also are just hearing a new message from the president, who posted on Truth Social a message. He says, in Minnesota, the troublemakers, agitators, and insurrectionists are in many cases highly paid professionals. The governor and mayor don't know what to do. They have totally lost control and are currently being rendered useless. If and when I am forced to act, it will be solved quickly and effectively. That at least appears to be another message from the president, who has threatened, or at least or toyed with the idea of invoking the Insurrection Act. That is something that local leaders here have been fearful of and have warned protesters to remain peaceful in order to avoid.
Nnamdi, thank you so much for that. So, Chris, the administration has warned repeatedly, if you don't want to be detained or pepper sprayed, don't interfere with ICE. But there are all these stories about people who are doing no such thing. The New York Times tells one story of a family of 6. So they're trying to drive home from a basketball game, and they turn onto a road that turns out to be blocked by a protest. And then, quote, crowd-controlled grenades went off around them, and one tear gas canister rolled beneath the car, according to the mother. A concussive blast from the tear gas canister or another device, she wasn't sure, rocked the vehicle, she said, setting off the airbags and trapping the family as acrid smoke billowed around. The couple said they were able to get their children, ages 6 months through 11 years, out of the car only after her husband kicked the door open. A woman, blinded and unable to breathe, circled the vehicle, pulling out as many of her children as she could. They say ICE threw the grenades and deployed tear gas. Now, we can't confirm that, Chris, but what does it tell you about tactics here and the risk for bystanders?
Yeah, it's very concerning, and I think, unfortunately, it's probably going to escalate based on the president's most recent posts here. I think the conditions were set quite some time ago, going back to the rhetoric that the president started in his first campaign and then his first administration and his continued throughout MAGA world and into the second administration. This rhetoric, this labeling of others, this demonization of others, immigrants, the left, calling people terrorists, anybody who speaks out against them or protests is somehow a terrorist. I think that, coupled with everything's a crisis. So, these hordes of invaders coming across the border, Antifa and the far left. Now there's a fraud crisis in Minnesota, so it demands action. And those two things, coupled with the empowerment of DHS and their militarization, this massive budget that they have, and ERO agents and ICE agents and Border Patrol showing up in military gear in a U.S. city. I mean, what they're wearing, although it's not exactly uniform, but those are the same things that I wore in Fallujah, Iraq, or in Afghanistan, not really appropriate for a U.S. city. And I think those things combined really highlight that this is kind of the Stanford prison guard experiment at scale gone wrong. ICE and broader DHS have now identified themselves as a hammer, and if you do that, everything looks like a nail. So they are escalating in situations that any other federal law enforcement agent or well-trained police officer would not do that. So this is going to continue to just spin out of control unless there's some kind of intervention. And clearly the president and DHS secretary telling them that they have absolute immunity and continuing to label the others is going to be problematic moving forward.
So, David, tell me what you found when you looked into shootings involving immigration officials, not just in Minnesota, but all across the country.
Yeah, nationwide, Chris, since July, we've seen at least 14 incidents in which federal immigration officers, either with ICE or the Border Patrol, have fired their weapons at people in cars. The point here, Chris, is that what happened in the killing of Renee Good fits a very clear, overwhelmingly clear pattern. And that pattern applies not only to the details of the incidents themselves, the shootings, what happens in the field, but also applies to what happens after in terms of how DHS and other federal government agencies handle the case. I want to focus on that second part for the purpose of this conversation, because what happened in the Renee Good case is what has happened in every single one of these other incidents, which is that DHS very quickly makes public claims accusing the people who, the people who were shot at of weaponizing their vehicle, attempting to drive their car at federal agents or their vehicles to strike them, ram them, run them over, etc. But in most of these cases, Chris, those claims fall apart under scrutiny. Assaulting a federal officer is a very serious offense. And in only 4 of these cases have there been criminal charges against the people involved that actually stuck and led to ongoing criminal proceedings. In 4 other cases, those charges were either dismissed by a judge or proactively dropped by the DOJ for lack of evidence. In other cases, people were put directly into deportation proceedings without being criminally charged, even though DHS publicly claimed that they had committed this serious offense. And in 2 of the cases, I should mention, Chris, there were no criminal proceedings because the shooting was fatal. That's the killing of Renee Good in Minneapolis, of course, and the other is a case in the Chicago area, the death of Silverio Villegas Gonzalez. Now, Chris, I did hear from DHS on this. They told me that the pattern is not the use of deadly force by law enforcement, but rather the pattern is more civilians using their cars to try and run over agents. But when I asked them about specific cases, they just recycled the same statements that they made in the first place when those incidents first happened, accusing people of weaponizing their vehicles, even though in many cases that claim was directly contravened by video evidence. That includes, for example, the case of Carlitos Ricardo Parias here in LA. There's body cam footage that I hope we can play for our viewers at least briefly. As you can see here, the Border Patrol agent reaches into the vehicle, switches his gun hand to his left hand, and shortly after fires the weapon. He then exclaims, seemingly in surprise, and as you can see from this body cam video, the car is not moving when this happens, nor are there any federal agents in front of the vehicle. Nevertheless, DHS said at the time and maintains to this day that this person tried to weaponize his vehicle against agents. Last thing, real quick, Chris, this is one of the cases that was dismissed by a judge for mishandling of evidence and violations, according to the judge, of the subject's due process rights, including the fact that that body cam video you just watched wasn't turned over by the government until almost 6 weeks after the incident, which was 5 days after the discovery deadline set by the court, Chris.
Wow, some great reporting there. So, Chris, I want to underscore another key part of David's story. According to MS Now, none of the federal agents who fired their weapons have been charged with a crime. And defense attorneys in the cases told MS Now they don't know of any agents being placed on administrative leave or subjected to internal discipline. What message does that send to other ICE agents in the field?
Well, it certainly lets them know that they have absolute immunity. And listen, it's not typical. I'll give you like a personal example. When there's a shooting in the FBI during my time in the FBI, what happens is a team of dozens of agents immediately fly out to wherever that was and conduct sometimes up to a week-long investigation with a team of people. One that I'll highlight is there was a young woman abducted and she was held hostage, and the hostage rescue team rescued her after being shot at by the abductor, rescued her, killed the individual who had abducted her. It was all caught on video, but we still sent a team out and did a thorough investigation, looked into his background, his service record, his psychological state, what his actions were the day before, talked to all of his teammates. And of course, it came out as an above board shooting. But all of that was gone through because that is the standard. And you want to release that information to the public that, this was done right and that we ensured it was done right. And there are still lessons to be learned because even in a good shooting, there are things to be learned, things that could be done better. None of that is happening now. It's actually going in the wrong direction. And you see these agents, not only in the incident in Minneapolis, the agent had a gun in one hand and a cell phone in the other. I can't think of a situation ever that I would do that. And in this most recent video, he's switching hands to his offhand, which is not his dominant shooting hand. Unless he's a prolific ambidextrous shooter, you would never do that. And it's just a level of training and maturity that is just lacking right now.